So thanks to Marvel proving that a shared cinematic universe is both possible and successful, there's now shared universes popping up everywhere. Some are good, some are dead in the water, and some have just gone horribly, horribly wrong where you can't help but wonder how they'll get out of the hole they dug so deep. But I digress. In 2014, production company Legendary Entertainment stepped into the shared universe water with their Monsterverse and started with the king of the monsters himself, Godzilla. However, as many of us know, probably, this was not the first time Godzilla was adapted by an American studio, as of course there was TriStar's Godzilla, released in 1998. Though this wasn't even the first attempt at an American theatrical adaptation, as in 1983 there was going to be a film called Godzilla, King of the Monsters 3D. However, the project was cancelled due to budget issues. Back to stuff that was actually made. Even before that, there was the Godzilla animated series in 1978, which was a collaboration between Toho Company, the film company behind the Godzilla franchise, and Hanna-Barbera Productions, as well as a 24-issue comic run by Marvel from 1977 to 1979. With this sequel, Godzilla King of the Monsters, set for release this year, right now is the perfect time to take a look at Big G himself and his American theatrical adaptations. For those not in the know, the first Godzilla film, Godzilla, was released in 1954 and told the dark story of a giant monster created by nuclear radiation attacking and destroying Tokyo, all while the military and other human characters try to come up with a way to kill him. This film would make its way to North America in 1956, titled Godzilla, King of the Monsters, not to be confused with the film coming out this year, with all of the dialogue dubbed in English and additional scenes featuring American actor Raymond Burr as a reporter named Steve Martin, who witnesses all of the events while in Tokyo. Inspired by monsters such as King Kong and the Rhedosaurus from The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, as well as the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Godzilla has since evolved into a pop culture icon and has remained so for 65 years at this point. Godzilla is Toho's longest-running film series, with over 30 movies having come from both Japan and America. I've been a Godzilla fan for most of my life, ever since my friend Jack and his cousins showed me Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla back when I was in 2nd grade, and have loved him ever since. Now, the time gap between these two movies is 16 years and come from two different studios, that being Sony and Legendary, with both studios having two different intents of portraying Big G, with Sony having planned a trilogy of movies, while Legendary is going for a shared universe. Though I'm sure you're gonna say right now that it's clear as day which movie is better. But is there? Well, the answer might not be too obvious. Not trying to stir stuff up, it's just honesty on my end at the end of the day. But before we begin, there are spoilers ahead, you've been warned. Anyways, let's dig into these movies with our human characters. Now, even though both are monster movies, we obviously need our human protagonists. Why? Well, can't have it be 2 hours of nothing but monsters, as cool as that would be. But, hey, that's what video games are for, I guess. Let's start with the 1998 version, with its main protagonist being Dr. or Nick Tatopoulos, played by Matthew Broderick. Well, he's a nerd, he's socially awkward, and he previously studied the radiation effects of earthworms, and because of that was hired by the US military to study our favorite giant mutant lizard. Quick note, he sports the same last name as Patrick Tatopoulos, who created the Godzilla design in this movie. Take that how you will. Nick is okay, I guess. I think what helps him not be completely forgettable is cheesy lines like this.
That's a lot of fish.
Oh, what a classic meme. I find that I like this character for all the wrong reasons, as it's more enjoyable to admire just how goofy Nick is. I know there are people out there that find Broderick annoying in this movie to the point where they wanted Godzilla to eat him, but I honestly couldn't disagree more. Sure, he's not a phenomenal character, but there's sort of a charm to the goofiness seen in other summer movies such as this. As for the rest of the characters, they fall under the same camp. When it comes to Maria Patillo, I might have pronounced that wrong, as Nick's ex-girlfriend Audrey, and Hank Azaria as Audrey's friend and co-worker Victor, they do a decent job complimenting Broderick. Audrey is an administrative assistant at a New York news station who dreams of becoming a reporter, while Victor is a cameraman for said news station. They too have their own goofy moments, like Azaria in this scene.
by that much.
As well as the banter between Victor and his wife Lucy, played by Arabella Field. It is also hilarious that Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert are spoofed in this movie as Mayor Ebert, played by Michael Lerner, who's an obnoxious screamer that loves candy, and his assistant Gene, played by Laurie Goldman, who's his lapdog aide. Makes me almost wish they were the main characters. Oh, and Harry Shearer as Audrey's boss, Charles Kamen, finally shows what a real-life Kent Brockman would be like, funny enough. And of course, an obligatory monster walks by and the character in the foreground doesn't notice moment with Nancy Cartwright as Kamen's secretary. But what if I were to make a steamed hams joke in 2019 and try too hard to be cool?
Delightfully devilish, Seymour.
Last but not least, we have Philippe, a French Secret Service agent played by Jean Reno. Why is he even here? Well, when you've got a radioactive lizard running amok after being exposed to nuclear radiation in French Polynesia, fuck yeah, the French Secret Service would be trying to examine the events and attempt to cover it all up. Because we all do that. While he does have goofy moments like this...
Well, no, sir, I'm fine.
All right, keep it moving.
Well, thank you very much.
He even goes so far as to recruit Nick after Nick gets booted by the US military, no thanks to Audrey leaking top secret information regarding Godzilla. Philippe picks Nick up in a taxi that just looks like a regular old taxi cab. Yes, that is considered kidnapping. Followed by Philippe recruiting Nick to join his crew to locate Godzilla's nest, which happens to be in Madison Square Garden. Honestly, I wish he was in the movie more, as he only shows up in the beginning at a hospital, then comes back for the third act. So overall, the 98 cast is good in the corniest ways possible, for better or for worse. Now with the 2014 version, we mostly follow Ford Brody, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, who lived in Japan in 1999 when a nuclear reactor meltdown occurred in Janjiro, Japan, probably butchered that pronunciation, killing his mother, which left his dad Joe, played by Bryan Cranston.
You're goddamn right.
To obsess over the incident for 15 years. Officials stated that an earthquake caused the meltdown, but Joe thinks otherwise, leading him to try and investigate the site, which has been since restricted. Ford has moved on since, his words not mine, and started a family with a girl named Elle, played by Elizabeth Olsen, and the two have a son named Sam, played by Carson Bold. Now, yes, it is kind of funny seeing Aaron Taylor Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen as a married couple in this movie, as everyone knows that the very next year the two played the twin siblings Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch in Avengers Age of Ultron. Though, granted, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch did dip into incest in the No, we're not going there. Moving on. Anyways, Ford is also in the Navy and comes home to San Francisco to see Elle and Sam for like a minute before he's got to go to Japan and bail his dad out of jail. I'd be pissed too if that happened to me. As we follow Ford, we learn he's just your average Navy guy getting tangled in a giant monster fight, and that no matter what happens, he still cares for his wife, son, and dad, even when he tells him to move on from his mom's death. Again, his words, not mine. What I call a memorable? Not really. He's just there for the ride. It's too bad because I remember Joe the most and what he was all about. I dig his persistency to try and find the real cause of his wife's death, even if it makes him look crazy to his son. Joe knows the government is covering shit up and he just won't have it. Just wish he didn't have to be the one that gets axed off. I suppose what I can say about Ford also applies to Elle and Sam, though they at least have the benefit of being minor players in this game, with Elle clearly taking her nurse job very seriously, as you do in real life. Under the hood, Ishiro Serizawa, played by Ken Watanabe, and the organization he is a member of called Monarch, basically the S.H.I.E.L.D. equivalent in this universe, are on a hot pursuit to hunt and study the monsters that pop up throughout the movie and subsequently this whole movieverse. Serizawa might as well be this universe's Nick Fury if Monarch is S.H.I.E.L.D., as he takes his research very seriously and would rather have nature take its course without the military intervening. Clearly he's seen a Godzilla movie or two. So overall, the 2014 characters are better as they're more like real people, but I'd also argue that the 98 characters are more memorable even if it's for the wrong reasons. So, looks like this first section will end in a tie. So we've covered the humans, but that's not the main reason you sit down and watch a monster movie. You want to see it for the monsters, right? Well, unless you're a weirdo who watches it for the human characters, in which case, hello, and who the hell are you? In terms of the 1998 Godzilla, let's go back 4 years earlier during this movie's early production. Aside from this teaser trailer stating that it was being written by the same screenwriters that wrote Disney's Aladdin, and behind-the-scenes speed director Jan de Bont was first tagged to be director, oh, what could have been. The original design of Big G, made by Academy Award-winning special effects creator Stan Winston back in 1994, was drastically different from what ended up as the finished product. In fact, this Godzilla does a phenomenal job capturing Godzilla's essence. The design feels like a blend of Godzilla from his look in 1984's The Return of Godzilla, aka Godzilla, aka Godzilla 1985, aka this movie has too many damn titles, and his look from 1989 to 1995. It captures Godzilla's traditional vertical stance with the body design and back fins while still maintaining its own distinct look. Now, when director Roland Emmerich got a hold of the movie and wanted Sony to let him do things his way, which was the reason he said yes to directing the movie, by the way, the more we drift further away from this and arrive at this. It's funny since Emmerich himself has stated that he never liked Godzilla, so why would Sony approach him and his crew then? You can thank Stargate and Independence Day for that. However, perhaps the factor that contributed the most to Emmerich getting this project was producer Dean Devlin, who, unlike Emmerich, was a big Godzilla fan himself. Even though Devlin was the actual Godzilla fan, it was still Emmerich's movie, and thus Emmerich wanted a Godzilla that could run fast, and after seeing how most of the Godzilla scenes in this movie are chase scenes, I believe it. Hey, if in your mind you want something done right, you do it yourself. Yes, this does have a chance of being disastrous, but stick with me here. Now, this Godzilla's origin is much like the classic Godzilla origin, that being a lizard mutated via nuclear radiation. It is funny that Emmerich stuck with the original Godzilla origin despite not being a fan. He is also meant to be a mutated marine iguana, and not a Godzillasaurus. Yes, that's what the original Toho Godzilla was supposedly a mutated version of, if you didn't know that.
Yes, this is canon.
I will be completely honest, this design definitely takes some getting used to. I absolutely understand if your first reaction to this is, holy shit, this thing looks awful. And yes, that was my first reaction the first time I ever saw this movie. But hear me out. This is definitely a Godzilla that takes classic Godzilla, blurs him a bit, and imagines him in a different light. Every Godzilla before and after this incarnation is based on the T-Rex, specifically the old-school bottom-heavy vertical stance kind, whereas this version is based more on the modern horizontal T-Rex. He still retains the spikes on his back, and even though his head has a strange shape to it, it's still easily recognizable as a marine iguana, even if it doesn't make you think Godzilla. The giant jaw, however, is pretty inaccurate to real marine iguanas, though I guess you can argue that it's a part of his mutation. Either that or he's trying to imitate Trapjaw from He-Man. Though honestly, with how slim his proportions are, as well as the overall design aesthetic, he might as well have been the Rhedosaurus, which ironically enough critics at the time said this guy resembled more than he resembled actual Godzilla. But if I'm honest, I do agree with most fans that he looks too much like a Jurassic Park T-Rex. His roar is pretty recognizable as the Godzilla roar, just tweaked a bit. Frankly, it was a great idea, since it's too iconic of a roar to replace it with, well, any other roar. I might as well bring up Godzilla's diet, only because it plays a part in the movie. His diet consists of fish, despite the fact that iguanas eat mostly plants and some bugs. Maybe it's a side effect of the radiation that he prefers fish, but his massive lantern jaw helps him carry fish in his mouth. Now, in terms of his abilities, he's got a handful of them. He has atomic breath, though it's rather unfortunate that he only uses this ability twice throughout the movie. I'm not a fan of how it looks like he's breathing fire, though I guess the film crew thought this looked realistic. Oh, and he can run. But unfortunately, the running is pretty damn inconsistent. In a good chunk of the movie, Godzilla is shown outrunning a bunch of US military Apache helicopters and easily getting the upper hand. Yet towards the end, he's having trouble catching this taxi with Broderick and the gang in it. Now, wait a minute. An Apache's top speed is 182 miles per hour, and the car that the taxi is based on has a top speed of 134 miles per hour, though this is only theoretical. If anything, Godzilla could easily do this.
It's that easy.
I get that it's a movie, but this goes past my suspension of disbelief. I know, for a movie about a radioactive lizard. Also, thanks to Wikizilla, apparently this Godzilla has a top speed of 300 to 500 miles per hour, which just makes me pound my head against the wall even more. It especially gets ridiculous when Godzilla gets the upper hand by trapping them in a tunnel as well as in his mouth, yet he still doesn't kill them. I suppose you could say it's hard to catch a cab in New York. I don't know, maybe he got tired towards the end. Godzilla also has the ability to burrow into the ground, which would explain why he keeps disappearing all the fucking time and plays a part into something we'll get into shortly. Now when it comes to the Godzilla babies, I'm not going to dwell too much on them since they aren't that much different from Godzilla. And hey, I welcome the idea of Godzilla babies. Toho's done them before, and the fact that Godzilla burrowed underground to a place where he could lay all of his eggs makes sense biologically. Iguanas burrow their eggs underground in order to protect them from predators, and when you've got a large empty space like Madison Square Garden in the case of the movie, it makes sense for the nest to reside there. He's not attacking New York, he just wants a place to lay his eggs. Just don't get between him and his babies. But unfortunately, the sequences involving the babies, once they hatch from their eggs, are just straight up ripped off from Jurassic Park. And this isn't just me exaggerating. They just have the babies essentially act like velociraptors now due to the unfortunate fact that the crew smells like fish and that these are hungry babies. It is kind of funny when you realize that a creature resembling a T-Rex has given birth to creatures resembling raptors, as if we're now in Carnosaur. Funny that both Jurassic Park and its mockbuster cousin get ripped off simultaneously. So the 98 monsters are okay, but definitely belong more in the Jurassic Park movies than anything else. However, the creatures themselves aren't too bad, and I'm going to go on a limb and say that if this wasn't a Godzilla movie and thus the creatures were something else entirely, I believe more people wouldn't resent them as much as they do even over 20 years later, though the Jurassic Park point would probably still stand. I guess Godzilla's ability to run fast just wasn't quite worth it, and in the end, in the eyes of many. Now in the animated sequel series Godzilla the Series, Godzilla acts more like Toho Godzilla and less like he did in the movie. However, we're only focusing on what appeared in both movies and not counting any spin-offs. This Godzilla did appear in 2004's Godzilla Final Wars, kind of. You see, due to international copyright law and the contract between Toho and Sony, which expired in 2003 as Sony did not make any sequels to the 98 Godzilla movie, Toho was able to use the character's likeness and abilities.
Run! It's Godzilla! It looks like Godzilla, but due to international copyright laws, it's not.
However, they couldn't just call him 98 Godzilla or American Godzilla, as that just doesn't have quite the ring to it, in addition to Toho not feeling that the creature deserved the same name as their staple character. Toho producer Shogo Tomiyama, producer for the entire Godzilla Millennium series from 1999 to 2004, said that 98 Godzilla took the god out of Godzilla, end quote. So thus the creature was called Zilla in Final Wars, and was basically the same character despite the name change.
Still, we should run like it is Godzilla! Though it isn't.
It is also worth noting that 98 Godzilla and the attack on New York City was also referenced in 2001's Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, or GMK for short, as there are two students talking about the attack saying that the Americans thought it was Godzilla, when it probably wasn't, though it doesn't take place in the same continuity as Final Wars. And of course I think it should without saying that making a reference to something without having to explicitly say what it is you're referring to, or even showing something resembling that, was not a violation of the contract that Toho had with Sony. Much like Toho, Godzilla fans have also dubbed this creature as Zilla, mostly despite the creature and the movie. However, I'm not one of those people. I think enough time has passed to where I still call this guy 98 Godzilla instead of Zilla, even in the context of either GMK or Final Wars. It is also worth noting that this creature did appear as Zilla in the first issue of IDW's Godzilla Rulers of Earth comic series in 2013, and would be featured in 7 other issues. As in issue 1, Zilla is mistaken for the real Godzilla, much like how the creature was referenced in GMK. Plus, with the 2014 Godzilla's existence, fans everywhere can at least sleep at night knowing that the 98 Godzilla is no longer the American Godzilla, and is instead an American Godzilla. Ironically, the crew behind 2014 Godzilla saw what 98 Godzilla did to Big G and were like to themselves, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, this design has been criticized, especially by the Japanese, for being fat. To which I say, what are you talking about? He stands up vertically like every other Godzilla, but he's also got a hunch, which only gives the illusion of him being fat. Frankly, he's not any chunkier than Godzillas of the past, so it's still a head-scratcher for me. It is pretty ironic that Fatzilla would be one of the inspirations in the design of Godzilla in the 2017 Japanese animated film, Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. Seriously, look at these two. But I'm not going to go off topic at this point. The entire design to me seems to take inspiration from the look he had from 1989 to 1995 for most of the Heisei era due to the slim proportions and even his head size, with a sprinkle of the hard edge presented in the Millennium era, evidenced by the jagged dorsal fins he sports. To my knowledge, this is one of a few Godzillas that have gills, with the others being Shin Godzilla and apparently the Showa-era Godzillas from 1954 to 1975. Considering Godzilla has always been known to rise from the water, it makes sense, especially in this movie, where he's underwater for extended periods of time, though of course he still has the ability to breathe air. Thought it was a neat detail to comment on. Like the 98 version, the roar is a variation on the classic Godzilla roar, though this roar sounds much more monstrous than previous incarnations, which is fitting for what was at the time the biggest Godzilla to date until Shin Godzilla in 2016, followed by Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. Now, this Godzilla's origin is completely different from every other version in the way that he isn't the result of nuclear explosions. Instead, Godzilla is an ancient lizard from the Permian period that evolved into a water breather as the Earth was cooling and the natural atmospheric radiation decreased until going into a long hibernation, but was awakened by a nuclear submarine in 1954. By the way, nice Easter egg there. Funny enough, the idea of Godzilla being an ancient prehistoric creature rather than a result of a nuclear explosion was originally going to be used in the 1994 American Godzilla movie before Roland Emmerich got his hands on the project. Anyways, the American and Russian militaries came in to help the Japanese government by trying to kill him with nuclear weapons under the guise of nuclear testing. But because this is Godzilla, it didn't kill him and then he vanished for another 60 years, which of course was covered up. Much like 98 Godzilla, 2014 Godzilla's intention isn't to attack and destroy humanity, it's all about some mysterious new creatures that Godzilla seems to know about. And speaking of which, unlike the 98 version, this movie actually has Godzilla fight another monster. The massive unidentified terrestrial organisms, or MUTOs for short, basically resemble giant moths that fortunately don't impede on Mothra's design too much, as these are more like real moths, albeit monstrous, as opposed to Mothra, who is traditionally more like a butterfly, though the next movie obviously has different plans. However, in the prequel comic from Legendary Comics titled Godzilla Awakening, it is noted that their actual name is Shinomura, which translates into Swarm of Death, as Muto is just a general name for any random creature that no one knows anything about. I do wish that the name Shinomura showed up in the movie, since even Godzilla can be considered a Muto as well. The awakening of the male Muto in Japan brings Godzilla back into working order, as Godzilla is a territorial creature this time around, and when you invade an animal's territory, the last thing you want to do is to try and fuck with it. The female Muto awakens in Las Vegas thanks to the male Muto awakening, and they seem to have started breeding. In terms of their origin, this guy and gal are apparently ancient parasites also from the Permian period that fed off radiation and are thus attracted to sources of man-made radiation. They're certainly cool additions to Godzilla's ever-expanding rogues gallery. They both have the ability to fly, which makes sense for giant moth creatures, and I think the thing that makes me like them so much is just their unique look. Every other monster to show up in a Godzilla movie always features some kind of texture, but these things are as smooth as a baby's butt. There's nothing else that looks like this in the Godzilla franchise. So, even though I don't mind the monsters in 98 Godzilla, point goes to 2014 Godzilla, as it's more so my personal cup of tea, and it isn't riddled with inconsistencies that create plot holes. So we've discussed the monsters, but how about the effects that brought them to life? So how exactly do you ruin a giant monster? Terrible computer-generated imagery to boot. Now, I can already sense someone's gonna type in the comments saying, "Oh, this came out in the 90s, man, cut it some slack." To which I reply, who are you trying to kid? A reminder, this movie came out when big-budget, mind-blowing CGI effects in movies was at its peak with movies like Terminator 2, Jurassic Park 1 and 2, Jumanji, Twister, Starship Troopers, Men in Black, and many others to count with groundbreaking CGI that even still hold up to today's standards. Except those Jumanji monkeys, that shit never looked real. So there's no excuse as to why the CGI in this movie has inferior effects compared to those other movies mentioned. Especially when you consider Godzilla had a bigger budget than any of the movies I just mentioned. Now, it's easy to mistake that the use of rain in all of Godzilla's scenes is meant to obscure Godzilla and thus make him blend in better. Though in reality, rain just complicates things further since it also requires making Godzilla look like he's soaked. For the longest time, I couldn't exactly figure out why it never looked like Godzilla was actually there interacting with his environment. The effects don't get much better for the babies, and despite a more frequent mixture of CGI and practical effects via guys in suits, the CGI still manages to stick out like a sore thumb like it has been throughout the rest of the movie. However, you can't deny the fact that the filmmakers are at least trying to pull off the realism in these creatures. While researching online, I stumbled across this pretty helpful site stating that the main problem as to why the CGI sucks here is the lack of motion blur. In animation, motion blur replicates textures and movements as if they were right in front of a camera instead of looking exactly like it was added in post-production. That's why this looks like a bunch of blocks flying up and this looks like wind is blowing the blocks up. It's a neat visual trick that fools the eye, and I think if it was used in this movie, they'd successfully make Godzilla look like a living creature and less like an anime creature. There are instances where practical effects are used, and some are even a mix of practical and CGI besides the scenes with the Godzilla babies. These are by far the most convincing effects by far in the movie. Now, I'm not saying that the crew should have completely ditched the CGI and just done all practical effects throughout the movie like I'm some kind of snob or anything. That'd just be unrealistic. But I do think that if the movie had better CGI to complement the practical effects, I'd probably be singing praises to the effects. When it comes to the effects in the 2014 version, the CGI used to create Godzilla looks amazing, and unlike the 98 version, it actually looks like he's there. The special effects consist of modern keyframing while having a built set in the foreground, with Andy Serkis doing the motion capture movements for all of the monsters, which this movie does spectacularly, although this practice is pretty much standard in the movie industry these days. Yeah, I think it's obvious who won here. Though I'll still give credit to the 98 crew for mixing it up with some practical effects. It's just like I said earlier, I wish the CGI was able to complement them just as well, because this would be another tie if that did happen. Now to the most important aspect, the story. Remember how I brought up the different intentions each studio had? That plays quite a bit into both stories as we'll see here. Sony had a trilogy planned for Godzilla, but unfortunately there were no sequel movies due to the movie falling short of Sony's expectations, as well as being banned by critics and fans alike despite being financially successful. However, the story for the first sequel was somewhat adapted in Godzilla the series in the episode Hive. Anyways, in terms of the movie like mentioned earlier, Godzilla starts as a marine iguana who is mutated by nuclear radiation through nuclear testing in French Polynesia as the opening credits roll. After it's all over and done with, he attacks a Japanese fishing boat somewhere in the South Pacific Ocean, gets spotted in both Panama and Jamaica, and finally arrives and rests in New York City, all gaining the interest of the US military and introduces us to our human characters. I always found it strange how Godzilla starts somewhere near Japan, plows through Central America and the Caribbeans like nothing, and arrive in New York in what seems like no time flat. You never get a sense that a large amount of time has passed, nor is it really implied. The movie is edited like this is all taking place within a few days at most. There's not even on-screen text saying how many days, weeks, or months have passed, or even a character saying how much time has passed. We do meet Philippe in the meantime, asking one of the survivors of the fishing boat what exactly he saw. Why he lights up a lighter before doing so is beyond me. The old man does tell Philippe that the creature's name was Godzilla, as if this has happened before, but Oh right, this was in a different continuity before Toho retconned this movie. My bad. Of course, we meet Nick Tatopoulos, a biologist that studies the effects of earthworms in Chernobyl, who gets picked up by the US military to study a giant footprint left by the creature. After studying the footprint, Nick determines that Godzilla is a new species created by radiation rather than a lost dinosaur. Happening at the same time, we get introduced to Audrey, a newsroom assistant that dreams of becoming a reporter, but unfortunately that promotion is about as faint as the Cleveland Browns winning a single game in 2017.
Possibly can. And that one goes right through your hands. Incomplete pass, and what a disappointing.
When Godzilla finally arrives in New York, we see him rummage through a fishing village, foreshadowing future events, and eventually stomps through Manhattan. It is neat seeing him rise from the water, as is tradition, but it's all from a ground-level perspective. All throughout the sequence of Godzilla going through the fishing village, the audience never gets a good look at the face. Nice way to build up anticipation, not gonna lie. In the meantime, we meet Audrey talking to Victor and Lucy about wanting to advance her reporting career when Godzilla makes his way through. Everyone in the city panics while Godzilla roams around, though the destruction Godzilla causes here is more or less unintentional due to animal instinct. Victor does grab a news camera to get footage of Big G, because there's always nothing risky about that. Yeah, no risk. The army does arrive on the scene, and thanks to input from Nick, they decide to set a trap in order to catch this thing. Like mentioned earlier, the army decides to use fish to trap him based on the fact that Godzilla has attacked fishing boats and the New York fishing village. Makes sense to me. This is also the first time Godzilla's face is shown to the audience in full view. Unfortunately, the plan doesn't work the first time as Godzilla manages to evade the army as they begin to fire at him. One thing that bothers me about this incarnation is that Godzilla staying alive throughout the movie has more to do with the military here supposedly being from the Stormtrooper Academy, as nobody seems to land a shot on him. It's a giant lizard, guys. Is it really that hard? At least in the Toho movies, Godzilla would be shown being hit, even if it didn't affect him. Here, I don't see one single shot land on him, and remember, these shots were put in during post-production. The filmmakers intentionally have them miss. Why? Well, to cause as much, if not more, destruction to New York than Godzilla has. Unfortunately, the army's incompetence only gets worse from here. It's also worth noting that while it looks funny seeing multiple helicopters in not just this scene, but also in a future scene, this is not as far-fetched as it seems. An Apache helicopter, like the ones in the movie, are about 17 feet wide, while the streets in New York range from 60 to 150 feet wide. So it's not that big of a stretch in spite of its silliness with these Apaches occupying the airspace of the streets of New York all at once. Anyways, after showing off how ineffective the army is, Godzilla burrows into the ground for a while. After seeing Nick on TV, Audrey tracks him down as they used to be a thing when the two were in college 8 years prior, before Audrey just straight up left Nick without any warning for whatever reason, much like my own ex-girlfriends. Though, unlike my exes, she left Nick because he didn't propose to her for whatever reason. Maybe he's not ready, Audrey, jeez. His reason for not proposing isn't stated or implied, so who knows the reason. It's also pretty conspicuous that she went back to Nick after seeing that he's famous now, which honestly feels shallow and makes me think if these two got back together in the real world, their second go-around wouldn't last much longer if Audrey left him so easily the first time. Nick also tests a blood sample from Godzilla and makes the discovery that even though Godzilla is a biological male, due to his mutation he now reproduces asexually and that Godzilla is either about to lay eggs or has already laid them. It is worth noting that co-producer Dean Devlin stated that Godzilla in this movie is not a she. Though, of course, Patrick Tatopoulos said he intentionally gave Godzilla genitals and also noted that it's a subtle detail, especially in the scene where Godzilla nearly steps on Victor. At least it's better than Devastator from Revenge of the Fallen.
I am directly below the enemy scrotum.
Now, the pregnancy test Nick asks from this pharmacy, which is still open despite the city being evacuated, is one to test for gonadotropic hormones, which, from what I've gathered, regulates normal growth, sexual development, and reproductive function, though I couldn't find how scientifically accurate it is to use this kind of test on a lizard, but Nick does mention that the test wasn't designed for lizards to begin with, so... I'm mean, there's science fiction, and then there's this where even the main characters have a hard time comprehending what's going on. I'd rather just have a pregnancy test for lizards. At least it's not as hard to follow. If I'm missing something with the science here, I'd be more than happy to hear from one of you in the comments that knows more about this than I do. Hint, hint, it's not that hard. Anyways, Audrey selfishly steals some of Nick's research tapes in order to fulfill her reporter dreams after her friends Lucy and Vic tell her to, quote, toughen up. I don't think that's exactly what they meant, Audrey, unless you want Nick to be pissed at you again. But in another twist, Audrey's boss Charlie finds Audrey's tape, replaces Audrey in the tape with him, and broadcasts it on TV, thus getting Nick booted by the military. Audrey tries to apologize to Nick, but that's no good. He's got every right to be mad, you fucking thought. Yeah, she's sad for getting Nick fired, but what else did she expect from stealing top-secret government tapes? What a cunt. Nick gets a cab and tells the cab to take him to Newark Airport, despite the high probability of all flights being grounded during an event like this. But surprise, surprise, the cab driver is actually Philippe, who takes him to his secret hideout where the rest of his comrades are. And they're all gathered to find Godzilla's nest via tracking, as well as have the French cover up any traces of them having anything to do with this. Seems legit. Philippe and his team, along with Nick, managed to sneak underground disguised as American soldiers by chewing gum and Philippe sounding like Elvis. I personally find this scene funny, even down to Philippe saying, well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much.
Meanwhile, the military try to lure Godzilla with fish again, but it's butchered and Godzilla makes his way to the Hudson River, where a military submarine seems to have taken him out with a missile. Yeah, like the movie's gonna kill off the monster now. Nick and Philippe's crew track down the nest in Madison Square Garden, where they end up being followed by Audrey and Victor, because Audrey still feels bad for being a cunt, I guess. At least Audrey knows how to call the military in for an airstrike on Madison Square Garden from the announcer booth. Hooray for usefulness, I guess. Frankly, if it weren't for that, Audrey and Victor would have zero purpose in this part. After losing some French comrades, Nick, Philippe, Audrey, and Victor make it out in time before the military blows up the arena and thus killing the babies. Though the way they finally make it out of the garden is bullshit. What, do the busted chandeliers create a circular barrier from the babies? That's what you use to prevent sea bear attacks, not baby Godzilla attacks. Idiots. But oh shit, Godzilla didn't really die. Are you even shocked? Seriously, anyone could have seen that twist coming from a mile away. Godzilla sees his dead babies and notices our 4 remaining characters in front of him, leading him to think they're the reason for the baby deaths. I mean, he's not wrong. So the chase in the cab ensues. Like mentioned earlier, this whole chase is stupid. And Nick keeps the military up to date via the radio in the cab as to what's happening so they can plan another attack while getting chased. The gang makes a break for the Brooklyn Bridge to lure Godzilla into the military's trap, and guess what? They actually do end up trapping him in the Brooklyn Bridge. Now we can clearly see him leap the first section of the Brooklyn Bridge. He doesn't figure to jump over the second section and instead tries to go in for the bite. He outsmarts the damn military for the entire movie, but only now goes full retard.
Everybody knows you never go full retard.
And look, he gets tangled in the Brooklyn Bridge and the military takes him out. Yes, this is the only Godzilla movie where the military's weapons actually kill him. At the time, and still to this day, the only other Godzilla deaths have been from the original 1954 Godzilla, where a scientist creates an oxygen destroyer that kills Godzilla, and in 1995's Godzilla vs. Destroyer, where Godzilla's heart is basically a nuclear reactor that's having a nuclear meltdown and kills Godzilla by the end of the movie. Notice how neither of those had Godzilla getting killed by conventional weapons. Because conventional weapons aren't supposed to kill him! If you want a moment that pissed Godzilla fans off the most about this movie, this was it. But hey, the day is saved despite getting a look in Godzilla's eyes as if the audience is supposed to feel bad for him. Just before the credits roll, we get a scene that would have led into the second movie in a trilogy, which, like mentioned earlier, didn't happen. Why the second and third movie weren't made was due to how much hate this movie received, including from Toho themselves, despite the movie itself being a box office success. The ending to this movie was retconning Godzilla the series, to where Nick goes back to the blown-up Madison Square Garden to ensure there's no more Godzilla babies, and gets drenched in egg goop before the last egg hatches. Because Godzilla smells like Godzilla after getting said goop on him, The baby Godzilla imprints on Nick as if Nick is its father. Though I do need to wonder in both cases of the movie and the animated series, how did that egg not get incinerated like everything else? Maybe the eggs are flame resistant? Maybe he's part xenomorph? I don't know. Either way, I have a hard time buying it. Remember all those jokes you and your friends make about how the government is hiding shit from the public? Well, here's that brought to life. The organization Monarch is a joint coalition by several governments in 1946 created to study and hunt down giant monsters, particularly massive unidentified terrestrial organisms like Godzilla and the Mutos featured here. They tried to kill Godzilla in 1954 and thought it was successful, all while covering it up and saying it was a nuclear bomb test. Well, it turns out 45 years later in 1999, Godzilla wasn't the only monster roaming the Earth after a nuclear reactor in Japan has a meltdown, but the government was able to cover it up with only Joe Brody asking questions about it, it seems. His son Ford has wanted to move on from the incident, which I suppose is better than the alternative making meth. Every time Joe tries to investigate the site, the Japanese government arrests him until all of his questions get answered 15 years later in 2014 when him and Ford traverse through the restricted area of Jinjiro. Turns out the area isn't radioactive. But alas, the Japanese government catch Joe and Ford snooping around. You know, you'd think someone besides Joe would have discovered that the area wasn't radioactive, even if they weren't caught. Especially since this area has been closed off for a decade and a half. Turns out Monarch has a giant spore at the nuclear reactor that's about to hatch. Because of course a male Muto hatches from a spore and is making its way to America where its female companion has been laying. So let me get this straight. Monarch has been a thing for 68 years at this point, and only now does a monster escape from their captivity. Is this generation of Monarch agents just fucking incompetent at their jobs? Anyways, the male Muto's awakening also summons Godzilla. Now finally, an hour in, and we get a monster fight at the Honolulu airport. This is gonna be sweet! Wait, what the fuck? I want to see the monsters duke it out! This is probably the biggest problem everyone that's critiqued this movie has had. And yes, this happens later when Godzilla fights with one of the Mutos in San Francisco initially. The only time we see a monster fight is when Godzilla fights both Mutos in San Francisco, and it's the final battle. Like, you make a giant monster movie, and yet only show one monster battle on screen? Are you shitting me? This isn't like Cloverfield, where it's a found footage film and it's from the perspective of one character, hence why you barely see the monster in that movie. Just show the goddamn monster fights! Fortunately, it's been said that for Godzilla King of the Monsters this year, that director Michael Daughtry said that it will definitely take the gloves off for this film, no holding back, as he says it. I guess the best defense for why there's barely any fight scenes would be that this was only the second movie directed by Gareth Edwards, who would then go on to direct Rogue One, a Star Wars story. So perhaps it was inexperience on Edwards' part that the only monster fight is towards the end. But whatever the reason, it still makes me shake my head. We do cut between Ford and L. Brody, so it's nice to see the whole situation unfolding from the viewpoint of the military and ordinary civilians. Godzilla makes his way to San Francisco, where the military tries to take him, but much like classic Godzilla movies, conventional weapons do not damage him. He does manage to take out the Golden Gate Bridge, which, funny enough, marks the second straight year a kaiju destroyed the Golden Gate Bridge, the first being from the opening of Pacific Rim. At least Godzilla was polite enough to swim under the Navy's ships as opposed to taking them out as well. We also see the female Muto make her way through Las Vegas to San Francisco to meet with the male Muto. And the military gets a literal trainload of atom bombs in order to combat the fuckers. Of course they gotta get the train of bombs to San Francisco. Oh boy, did the military try. It does get intense during this bridge scene with the female Muto. It just makes you drip sweat.
Don't move. Can't see us if we don't move.
But the military's plan to nuke the monsters won't happen. Jesus Christ, it swallowed that nuke as if it were nothing! Yeah, I know that's what these things feed off of, but still! Just how often do you see a giant monster eat a nuke as if it were an apple or spaghetti? I thought so. We also get a glimpse of the female Muto's pregnant stomach, though surprisingly we never see baby Mutos. That would have been neat to see Godzilla combat as well, but it's a blown opportunity among others. Eventually we get the final battle between Godzilla and both Mutos, and I dig it for the most part. The scene where Godzilla powers up his atomic breath and unleashes it on a Muto is fantastic. It just runs a chill down your spine every time. My only criticism of that aspect is why didn't he use it towards the beginning of the fight? Yeah, I know, dramatic effect, blah 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 blah. But logically, it's something Godzilla would use the first chance he got. It is neat to see him fight two monsters that can both fly, something we haven't seen since 1992's Godzilla vs. Mothra, not to be confused with Mothra vs. Godzilla from 1964. The battle does feel like something from one of the Toho Godzilla movies, despite everything being CGI as opposed to rubber suits and puppets, which I definitely give it props for. And with the destruction, man does it give Marvel and DC a run for their money. Though I can easily see the whole destruction of private property trope getting used in future installments like what the Marvel Cinematic Universe and DC Expanded Universe have both done. At this rate, I don't expect that cliche to end anytime soon, no matter how stupid it gets. Of course, the way Godzilla destroys the final Muto is just badass. What a way to end the fight. But then, Godzilla falls flat on his stomach. Guess he's out of energy? Anybody know how to charge a Godzilla? Ford and Elle do get together again and live their story happily ever after, especially since they won't appear in the next movie. Spoilers. Godzilla, however, just lays there in the middle of San Francisco long enough to become a community for seagulls until finally waking up. He does the iconic roar before sliding back into the water, and then the movie ends. At least this one has an ending that makes this movie more of a standalone film without leaving a cliffhanger for a sequel that isn't guaranteed to happen. Now, yeah, the sequel for this is happening, but what if there wasn't going to be a sequel? We already saw that happen with the 98 Godzilla and its cliffhanger ending, and there sure weren't any theatrical sequels. Overall, this movie feels closer to a Toho Godzilla movie, though the monster teases throughout the movie are annoying, especially when it comes to the monster fights, which are just downright unnecessary. It felt like Legendary was playing it safe with this Godzilla movie. The first half is all build-up, while the second half is a nearly successful payoff. I do dig Godzilla being an ancient radioactive creature as opposed to being created by nuclear radiation like every other Godzilla ever. The Mutos were neat additions to Godzilla's ever-expanding rogues gallery. The addition of Monarch is a cool way to tie the monsters all together, including King Kong, though it's still contrived how they were able to cover up every monster for 68 years, yet in 2014 a few of them made their way to the public viewing. But then again, if the Mutos and Godzilla didn't make their way to the public, we wouldn't have a movie. Overall, the 98 Godzilla movie makes for good popcorn entertainment like most other summer blockbusters such as Independence Day or Bayformers. However, this could have easily been any other monster not named Godzilla. It just feels like any other generic monster movie, and I think that's what makes it unfavorable. The 2014 Godzilla, like I already said, feels closer to a traditional Toho Godzilla movie, but the action is lacking. Now, I'm not asking for the entire movie to be nothing but action. I'm just asking for something to break the monotony. And for the love of God, never tease monster fights, let alone do it twice in the same movie, and only have 3 confrontations. But the 2014 version also has the advantage of being able to stand by itself and not have sequel bait like the 1998 version. Sequels aren't always guaranteed. Just ask the Ghostbusters fanbase about Ghostbusters 3 getting teased before finally being confirmed for July 2020, assuming something doesn't happen between then and now. And no, the 2016 Ghostbusters isn't Ghostbusters 3 before someone says something in the comments. But back on track, this point goes to Godzilla 2014. So now it's time for the final thoughts. So all in all, Godzilla 2014 is the superior American Godzilla movie, though I bet it wasn't the landslide that most thought it'd be. I had been working on the script for over a year, mostly to look over every aspect of both movies without having everything resort to ties. Now on an entertainment level, 98 Godzilla is the more entertaining of the two. However, being entertaining doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It's entertaining due to eye candy like the military scenes and explosions, as well as for the wrong reasons like acting. Frankly, if it wasn't for the name, I'd say Godzilla could have been able to become a cult film in the same way as Robot Jox. Godzilla 2014 does better as a self-contained movie and avoids resorting to being stupid and pays a better tribute to Godzilla himself. Now, admittedly, I haven't seen Kong Skull Island yet, though I'd like to see it before seeing Godzilla King of the Monsters. Legendary may have played it safe to start, but it looks like they're not fucking around anymore. So, thanks for watching, subscribe if you haven't, and click the notification bell because YouTube would rather complicate things, though even clicking the bell doesn't guarantee that you'll be notified of everything. And I'll be sure to catch you all later. Peace. And I might do a comparison of Kong Skull Island and Peter Jackson's King Kong.
You're goddamn right.